بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبع هداه أما بعد. We begin today's session with the bab or the chapter that Imam al-Jazari rahimahullah ta'ala he entitled Tajweed. Tajweed. And what he intends by way of Tajweed is a term that has been applied to the whole of the science itself. As far as the kalima and the word tajweed is concerned, then the meaning in the language is at-tahseen. That is to make something better, to make something hasan. And linguistically, one would say jawwad al-shay idha hassanahu, that he made it jayyid or made tajweed, yani jawwadahu, when he hassanahu, yani that he makes it better. So when something is made better, yani he makes it, he makes tahseen of it. The term tahseen, to make something better, is from the term hasan, which means something being good. The term tajweed is from the term jayyid, yani to make something jayyid, to make something good. So the term tajweed then is a reference to making something better, correcting and rectifying a thing. Of course, as it relates to this science, it is a relation, or it is in relation to rectifying the affairs of qira'ah and recitation of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the statement of Imam al-Jazari, or the bab, or this chapter heading, Tajweed, is a reference here then to that which is connected to rectifying the qira'ah, rectifying one's recitation. As we said, for those of you who have been following up until now, it is as though Imam al-Jazari, he placed, because you would expect this bab or this chapter to be right at the beginning of the book. But here he places the affair in the, or after 2 chapters of the book, almost as though he is establishing the fact that these 2 chapters are essential for our discussion on tajweed. Yani for us to know the makharij of the huruf, the places of the origins of the huruf, and for us to be familiar likewise with the sifat of the huruf, the characteristics of the letters. Then this is a prerequisite for us to understanding the rest of the sifat and the rest of the characteristics that one should be familiar with. You may remember that we said that the sifat, or the characteristics that are related to the recitation of the letters, are of 2 types. Sifatun lazima. Sifatun lazima, or asliya, a reference to those characteristics that are present and intrinsic to the letters. They are present within the letters, whether they are connected to a word or not. And then we have those sifat that are arida or aradiyya, which is the characteristics that are incidental characteristics that come upon the letter based upon it being placed in a particular place or a certain region. And so the affair of tajweed, then, we have the rest of the book is going to be around the sifat al-arida, the sifat that come to a letter based upon it being connected to another letter in the book of Allah Azza wa Jal. And so that which has passed, need to know and be familiar with these previous characteristics. It is almost as though you are expected to know and be familiar with the characteristics that have passed. Yani, it is almost as though you are expected to be familiar with the ma'rifat of the makharij and an understanding of the makharij and the places of origin. It is almost as though you are expected to know that which is connected to the sifat and the characteristics of the letters. And it is important, ikhwan, for us to be familiar with the fact that the scholars I mentioned, that tajweed in essence revolves around 5 main characteristics or 5 main things. The first of them, معرفة مخارج الحروف. That is, that a person is familiar with the makharij of the huruf, or the places of the origins of the letters. You must be familiar with that, because the whole of the exercise of qira'ah is going to revolve around the makharij. It's going to revolve around you knowing that this letter comes from this place and that letter comes from that place. That this letter comes from the halq, that letter is from the lisan, this one is from aqsal lisan, that one is from this point in the tongue, that one is from the lips, and so on. You must know that for you to be able to recite in a manner that accords with the Lugha al-Arabiya and the Arabic language, and how those letters within the Arabic language are recited. And so the first thing then is makharij al-huruf, to be familiar with the makharij, the places of the origin of the articulation of those letters. The second affair is ma'rifatu sifat al-huruf. The second issue is that you're familiar with the sifat of the huruf, that you're familiar with the characteristics of the harf, يعني that you're familiar with those sifat that are related to the letters themselves, those attributes and those characteristics related to the letter themselves. What are the characteristics of this letter in relation to sound, in relation to the manner in which it should be recited, in relation to where it falls within the mouth, and how the articulation of the letter should be. These characteristics are important and essential for you, again, to recite the Quran correctly. And that is the second then affair related to Tajweed. That is, having a knowledge of the sifat of the huruf. A person's recitation will not be rectified until he is familiar with the sifat of the huruf. Even if it were that a person never studied anything from Tajweed, but his qira'ah is mujawwad, and his qira'ah is excellent, because for the whole of his life he took the Quran from one that was an imam in qira'ah. And so he never studied a book of Tajweed, ever. But he was nurtured by one who was an imam in qira'ah. And so the only thing that he knows is taking from his sheikh, and his sheikh has excelled in the field. And so even though he hasn't studied the sifat al-huruf, even though he hasn't studied the makharij and what have you, he has learned them naturally by taking automatically from the tongue of his teacher. And so though he didn't study, he still implements the manifestation of the sifat. Because what is the benefit of learning the sifat and learning about the characteristics of the letter? The benefit is that the letter is recited correctly. And so if one is able to do so with and by uttering the letter after learning it, by mimicking one's teacher, and his emulating his teacher's excellent. He's exactly the same as his teacher, and his teacher's mujawwad. His teacher is a master in tajweed and in qira'ah. Then it is said that is sufficient. It is said that is sufficient, and that he has uttered the letters from there and based upon their sifat and from their makharij. So those are the first two things that one must know in order to recite the Quran with tajweed. Thirdly, the third affair related to tajweed is to be familiar with that which issues from the letters, from ahkam and from rulings. That is, there are ahkam and rulings related to the letters when those letters come together with other letters, as we've been mentioning and reiterating in previous sessions. These science, or these branches of the science, really is where, if we hear anybody saying, well, tajweed can be tricky, or the knowledge of tajweed is not simple, or it isn't straightforward, then number one, that isn't correct. The knowledge of tajweed, alhamdulillah, is a science that is straightforward and it is easy to understand, but you must take the knowledge with tadarruj. You must take it gradually. Learn the makharij firstly. Secondly, learn the sifat of the huruf and the characteristics of the letters. Thirdly, understand now how those letters interact with other letters and what changes may occur to what we know of the makharij and of the sifat. What changes may occur when this letter is beside that one, or when it falls at the end of the word, and so on. So that third affair is having a knowledge of the ahkam, a knowledge of the rulings related to those letters when they fall within a word, or when they have certain letters beside them, or they come at the end of the word and the next word begins in a particular manner and a particular fashion. That is number 3. Number 4 is that one must be acquainted with the wuquf and the ibtida. The wuquf and the ibtida is to know when it is permissible to stop, where one may permissibly stop, and where one begins his qira'ah. That is whether or not one is going to begin reciting from scratch, mathalan, that he begins the recitation in the first rak'ah of Salatul Isha. So he's in the first rak'ah of Salatul Isha. How does he begin his recitation? Similarly, if he's reciting and he comes to a waqfa, he comes to a stop, and so he stops his recitation, and that stoppage can either be stoppage that is based upon him wishing to emphasize a particular element of the ayah, or because of the fact that stopping is praiseworthy at this point, or because of the fact that he's run out of breath, and so he needs to stop. But when he stops, where does he stop? And if he stops in a particular place, how does he initiate reciting again? These rules, again, are a part of Tajweed. In fact, from the people of knowledge are those who say that this is nisf Tajweed. This is half of Tajweed. And that is possibly based upon the fact that there is a narration that is popular in the books of Tajweed and in the study and the discussion of the affair of Tajweed. Though I don't know of its origin, but it is present with most of the books, whether the books of the earlier scholars or the books of the latter-day scholars. And that is the statement of Ali radiallahu anhu, that he mentions that when he was asked about tilawa and about correct recitation, that he radiallahu anhu wa ardahu, he said, huwa tajweed al-huruf, huwa tajweed al-huruf wa ma'rifat al-wuquf. It is tajweed al-huruf. It is to perfect and recite correctly and well and beautifully the letters. وَمَعْرِفَةِ الْوُقُوفِ, and it is to know where to stop. And so you may say, well, khalas, it's easy, you stop at the end of the verse, but that is not the case. In all instances of qira'ah, there are many places where the verse, for example, مثلا آية الدين, the verse of the debt, or the loan that is in Surah Al-Baqarah, the longest verse in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is one whole page of the Quran. One verse, which is one whole page of the Quran. One is not going to recite, or is highly unlikely, other than with the established reciter, that you're going to recite the book, the verse of Dain in one breath. It is mentioned that Manshawi, the great well-known reciter, Sheikh al-Manshawi, that he recited Ayatul Dain in one breath, but it is not something that is known, ikhwan, because it is a long verse. For you to recite one page of the Quran in one breath, sa'ab, ikhwan. So an ayah like Ayatul Dain, it is inevitable that you're going to stop in possibly most likely more than one place in your recitation of the verse. If you do so, and you are inevitably going to do so, where do you stop when you're reciting the verse? And then where do you begin again? That again is from the branches of Tajweed that will come towards the end of the book, the Matan al-Jazariyah. And the fifth affair is riyadatul lisan, that is, that one practices with the tongue. Kathratul tikrar, that one repeats and practices and one recites the book of Allah Azza wa Jal. The more one recites the book of Allah after knowing the rules, the better he becomes with implementing them. It doesn't make any sense, ikhwan, learning these rules and we never recite the Quran. The one who struggles to recite the Quran without knowing the rules is better than the one who knows the rules and never recites the Quran, in terms of his benefit, in terms of his ajr, in terms of his reward, in terms of seeking and receiving the benefit from the recitation of the Quran. Even if he recites yatata'ta, he doesn't distort the Quran, but he struggles. He is better than the one who never recites the Quran, even if he's a master in the rules of Tajweed, but he never recites the Quran. Kayf. And so, the affair of Tajweed revolves around these affairs, and it is that Imam al-Jazari, rahimahullah ta'ala, he discusses in this chapter. There is another issue, ikhwan, and that is an issue related to the mistakes that occur when one recites the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are mistakes that the scholars have categorized into categories. These mistakes, ayyuha al-ikhwa, revolve around a number of attributes. And they are of two main types. Number one, the mistakes are referred to as al-lahan. The lahan, or the errors in recitation, are of two main types. That which the people of knowledge refer to as lahnun jali. And the lahn, the second type, lahnun khafi. As far as lahnun jali, then it is a reference to the clear, manifest error. It is a reference to the clear, manifest error. That is, the error that is manifest even to the one who isn't really a person of knowledge in relation to tajweed and qira'ah. But just by hearing it, if you're familiar with the Arabic language, for example, then it is manifestly clear that this is an error in the recitation of those verses. That is the first type of lahan, or first type of error, the lahnun jali. The second type of error is known as the lahnun khafi. The lahnun khafi is the hidden error. And it is the error, ikhwan, that is not manifest unto the one who is not familiar with the ahkam of tajweed. Or it may be with the one who is a beginner in the science, the one who has studied some of the basic rules. Then he may come across the lahnun jali, the lahnun khafi. He may come across that, he may detect it. But generally the lahnun khafi is detected by the more seasoned reciter, by the one who is familiar with some knowledge concerning tajweed, concerning the statements of the scholars in relation to the recitation of the book of Allah Azza wa Jal, the varying ahkam and the varying rulings related to tajweed. He may detect them. And this goes back, ikhwan, to what I mentioned in the beginning of these durus, that we have to understand, ikhwan, that there is a difference between a person reciting with tajweed and in accordance with the rules of qira'ah, and a person just having a beautiful voice. Oftentimes, people confuse tajweed for having a beautiful voice. Beautiful voices are from Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah Azza wa Jal is the one that blesses an individual with that. It doesn't now mean that you're going to study tajweed and all of a sudden, overnight, you're going to now sound like Sa'id al-Ghamidi. Or you're going to sound like Abdullah al-Juhani. Or you're going to sound like Manshawi. This is not going to occur. The voice that you have is a voice that you have. But your qira'ah and your recitation will be beautified, number one, with practice. Number two, with taking from the mouth of one who is established with qira'ah and is a established seasoned qari. And if not that, if one is not afforded the opportunity to do so, then at the very least, by listening to the well-known, well-established Qurra and reciters of the Quran, like Al-Husari مثلا, يعني Khalil Al-Husari, or like Al-Manshawi, or like Abdul Basit, and others from among the Qurra that are well known, that in terms of their recitation, ikhwan, then they are at the head of the reciters in this era. And so the affair then of lahnun khafi, or the hidden defect, or the hidden error is not completely hidden to everyone. It is detected by those who are familiar. And as we go along with these rules, and as we go through these chapters, and we become more and more familiar with these ahkam of tajweed, you yourself, ikhwan, will be able to listen to someone and be familiar with listening to the qari, even if his voice is beautiful. His voice being beautiful is one thing, yani we say Allahumma barik, but as far as his implementation of the rules, then there are occasions, ikhwan, where one may hear a beautiful voice but grimace at the amount of mistakes that are being made in relation to tajweed. So in terms of lahnun jali, then lahnun jali is manifest in a number of ways. Lahnun jali, ayuha al-ikhwa, is manifest either by a person adding a letter where a letter should not be, or by omitting a letter where a letter should be, or by changing the letter, by changing either the makhraj of the letter or by changing the sifa of the letter. And so, though mathalan ta and dal have the same makhraj, yani based upon the differences that are present with the sifat, the ta may begin to resemble a da depending upon how it is recited, and the dal may begin to resemble a ta. If one changes in something that is elementary, the recitation of a letter, there are some instances, ikhwan, where the changing of a letter, that or two letters that have the same makhraj or a similar makhraj, but because of the fact that one has affected the sifat or affected the characteristic of how those letters are to be recited, he now makes one letter resemble another, and in doing so, he seriously affects and distorts the meaning that is present within the verse. An example of that, the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, as occurs in Surah An-Nisa, وَنُدْخِلُهُمْ ظِلًّا ظَلِيلًا وَنُدْخِلُهُمْ ظِلًّا ظَلِيلًا. Allah Azza wa Jal here is mentioning that which is related to the people of Jannah entering Jannah. Allah Azza wa Jal mentions, وَنُدْخِلُهُمْ ظِلًّا ظَلِيلًا. We will enter them under bounteous shade, يعني vast shade, that is in Jannah. May Allah Azza wa Jal make us from its inhabitants. This vast shade that Allah Azza wa Jal speaks about is shade that occurs, or that is uttered with the letter, and it's the word, it begins with the letter dha. ظِلًّا ظَلِيلًا. But if a person slightly changes the affair, that is, he removes the مثلا the isti'la that is in the letter, because dha is from the letters of isti'la, and he removes مثلا the itbaq that is in the letter, then dha begins to resemble dhal. And so instead of saying وَنُدْخِلُهُمْ ظِلًّا ظَلِيلًا, he now says وَنُدْخِلُهُمْ ذِلًّا ذَلِيلًا. ذِلًّا ذَلِيلًا. ذِلًّا ذَلِيلًا now changes the word from dhil, which is a shade, and under the shade or under the shadow of something, to dhil, which is humiliation and disgrace. So instead of saying وَنُدْخِلُهُمْ ظِلًّا ظَلِيلًا. Yeah, we shall enter them beneath bounteous shade. He's now saying, نُدْخِلُهُمْ ظِلًّا ظَلِيلًا. We are now going to enter them under into a wretched disgrace. Which, وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ, is the complete opposite of what the ayah means. Here Allah Azza wa Jalla is speaking of takreem and ennobling the people of Jannah just by changing the sifa, not even the harf. The sifa of this letter, he now changes the letter itself because they are from a similar makhraj. Yani they are recited by raising the tip of the tongue up to the upper incisors. The makhraj is the same, but the characteristic differs based upon the sifat or the attributes in how the letter is to be recited. Similarly, by changing a harakah, by changing one of the harakat that are upon the letter, fatha, kasra, or dhamma, then we change the meaning of the Quran. We change the meaning of certain verses. Like that which Ahlul Bid'ah do, وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهُ مُوسَى تَكْلِيمًا. وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهُ مُوسَى تَكْلِيمًا. The origin of the verse, كَلَّمَ اللَّهُ, means that Allah Azza wa Jal spoke to Musa تَكْلِيمًا. Allah Azza wa Jal spoke to Musa directly. وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهُ مُوسَى تَكْلِيمًا. But by changing the hu, the haraka, from a dhamma, to a fatha, وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهَ, we now have an issue related to the i'rab of the sentence. That is, in relation to how that the word is now considered, the word lafzul jalala, Allah, instead of being the fa'il or the active participant, he now becomes the maf'ul. He now becomes the one that the action is done to. And so instead of saying that Allah Azza wa Jal spoke to Musa, then they say, and the one who does so, he now says that Musa spoke to Allah. And the reason that they do so is to negate that Allah Azza wa Jal speaks. But in any case, ikhwan, this type of change of the harakat without any evidence and without any salaf, without any precedence, is considered from lahnun jali. It is considered from the major forms of lahn. And of course, ikhwan, lahnul jali is without doubt haram. Lahnun jali is haram, ikhwan, if a person does it intentionally, and it is ugly if a person did it ignorantly. Now, the lahnun khafi manifests similarly in a number of ways, and we'll mention some of them. Generally, the main two ways in which lahnul khafi manifests is that a person commits an error that returns back to some of the more intricate sciences or intricate rules of Tajweed that, number one, do not affect the meaning of the word itself, but affect the beauty of the recitation. And so, for example, that he does not correctly implement, and there are a number of rules that we're going to come to, inshallah, but he doesn't correctly implement some of these rules. Al-ikhfa, al-idgham, al-tafkhim, al-tarqiq, the various types of mad and elongation. Yani, though the meaning isn't affected, the beauty of the recitation is affected. And so they are considered forms of lahan, but they are not forms of lahan that necessarily are considered sinful or even kufr, as may be the case with some forms of lahan al-jali. And so these generally are errors that return back to the sifat al-arida. We said the sifat or the characteristics of the letters are of two types: the sifat al-asliya, or the sifat that are the original or the asl of either the origins of the letter or the characteristics of the letter. These are the sifat al-asliya, the intrinsic sifat. Then we have the sifat al-arida, which are the characteristics that are related to when one letter is beside another. The majority of the instances of lahnun khafi, and we're going to discuss them inshallah as we go along, are instances of lahan and errors that occur in relation to the second type of characteristic that we're going to go on to look at and study. And so this affair of lahan, ikhwan, it is to be avoided at all costs. The more we study, the more we understand how the Quran is to be recited, the more we are able to avoid the ugly forms of lahan, whether the worst of them lahnun jali, or that which is lighter than them but still ugly nonetheless, lahnun khafi. Now, so we'll recite then the statement of Al-Imam Al-Jazari rahimahullah ta'ala under this chapter and under this bab. Al-Imam Al-Jazari rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions التجويد والأخذ بالتجويد حتم لازم من لم يصحح القرآن آثم لأنه به الإله أنزل وهكذا منه إلينا وصل وهو أيضا حلية التلاوة وزينة الأداء والقراءة وهو إعطاء الحروف حقها من كل صفة ومستحقها ورد كل واحد لأصله ورد كل واحد لأصله واللفظ في نظيره كمثله مكملا من غير ما تكلف باللطف في النطق بلا تعسف وليس بينه وبين تركه إلا رياضة امرئ بفكه. He mentions rahimahullah ta'ala that the application of tajweed and the implementation of tajweed is indeed necessary. Whoever does not rectify his recitation of the Quran is a sinner. Because with tajweed, the Lord, yani Allah Azza wa Jal, has revealed the Quran. And in this manner, from him it has reached us. Yani tajweed of the book of Allah Azza wa Jal is also the adornment, yani in the beautification of recitation, the beauty of presentation and reading. If tajweed is giving the letters their rights, it is giving the letters their rights as regards to every attribute and that which the attribute demands, and returning every one of its letters to its origin, and an utterance in its equivalent is like it. Yani uttering, and we'll come to that, but he mentions here ورد كل واحد لمثله واللفظ في نظيره كمثله. Yani, and the wording or a letter or a statement or an utterance that resembles another utterance, yani the rules that are applicable to two similar words are given the same ruling. He said every letter being complete without burden, but with ease in pronunciation and without haphazardness, and there is nothing between applying tajweed and leaving it except the practice of a person with his fakk, with his jaws. That is, the difference between applying and implementing tajweed and abandoning it is that a person practices. The more you practice after being taught, then the better one becomes. The more a person recites the book of Allah Azza wa Jal, the more beautiful his voice with the book of Allah Azza wa Jal becomes. He becomes more familiar with what he recites, and he's able to implement the rules of tajweed, and he's able similarly to beautify the voice in a manner that is befitting. And so, ikhwan, this affair of tajweed is of the essence. He mentions here that the hukum or the ruling of tajweed is hatmun lazimu, that the ruling of tajweed, yani the ruling of reciting the Quran with tajweed, is lazim, that is, it is compulsory. This is the position of Imam Al-Jazariyah, and there are many of the A'imma who hold this position, that tajweed is wajib. That tajweed is wajib, that whomsoever does not recite the Quran with tajweed, then he is sinful. What is their argument for that, and what is the reason or the evidence that they present in relation to the mas'ala, their argument in relation to that is that, as Imam al-Jazari rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions, لِأَنَّهُ بِهِ الْإِلَهُ أَنزَلَ وَهَكَذَا مِنْهُ إِلَيْنَا وَصَلَ. He said, that is because this is how Allah Azza wa Jal, this is how our Lord has revealed the Quran. And thus, it is imperative to recite the Quran as it has been revealed. For you to distort its recitation, to distort its meaning, to distort its wording, is not how the Quran was revealed. And therefore, it is not that which Allah Azza wa Jal had given to His Messenger ﷺ to be recited in that manner. That is a part of their argument. And they likewise use certain evidences that they have in terms of evidences from the book of Allah Azza wa Jal and evidences from the Sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Allah Azza wa Jal, from those evidences, for example, the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا, and recite the Quran with tartil. And so the affair of reciting the Quran with tartil, that is, as many of the scholars have mentioned, from them Al-Baydawi and others, جَوَّدَهُ تَجْوِيدًا, that you should recite it with tajweed. Recite it well and correctly with tajweed. This recitation then, we've been commanded to recite the Quran with tajweed. And so the school or the group of scholars who hold that tajweed is wajib, then they hold this position based upon the fact that this has been that which Allah Azza wa Jal has commanded the Messenger ﷺ to do, to recite the Quran with tajweed. In fact, and some of them argue that Allah Azza wa Jal Himself mentions that concerning His recitation of the Quran. They say, in relation to the verse of the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, وَكَذَلِكَ لِنُثَبِّتَ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ وَرَتَّلْنَاهُ تَرْتِيلًا. They say, and that is, in order to establish your heart and mind with it, O Muhammad, وَرَتَّلْنَاهُ تَرْتِيلًا, and we recite it upon you with tartil, with tajweed. And so they use this as an evidence to say that even Allah Azza wa Jal mentioned concerning Himself that He uttered it with tartil or with tajweed. That is the manner in which they utilize the verse. But in actuality, if we return back to the scholars of tafsir and the kutub of tafsir and the statements of the a'imma of the salaf concerning this statement, وَرَتَّلْنَاهُ تَرْتِيلًا, we find the statement of many of the salaf like Qatada and others, وَبَيَّنَّاهُ تَبْيِينًا, that they explain this وَرَتَّلْنَاهُ تَرْتِيلًا to mean وَبَيَّنَّاهُ تَبْيِينًا, that we have explained it to you with a sufficient explanation. And so the usage of that verse, ikhwan, of course, is something that is dubious. In any case, ikhwan, the scholars, and what is probably most balanced in relation to whether or not tajweed is wajib in relation to the one who recites the Quran, because there is an issue, of course, in relation to saying that it is wajib. What we're saying in essence, effectively, is that the one who does not carry that out, then he is sinful. And so, that is a ruling, ikhwan, that if you were to consider the many millions of Muslims who are across the globe, who are not familiar with anything other than reciting or putting the letters together and reciting what is present within the Quran. So they are not familiar with the ahkam, mathalan, of iqlab, and of ikhfa, and of idgham, and other than that. They recite, whether in the Arab countries or in the non-Arab countries. And they recite seeking the reward from Allah Azza wa Jal for that. Effectively what we're saying is that the one who does not recite with tajweed, then he is sinful for his recitation. That is, the one who recites and makes mistakes, then he is sinful when he does so. And that is a difficult position to hold. it is a position that is held by some of the people of knowledge nonetheless. Some of them go further and categorize this affair of being sinful into two categories. That is, if a person, his recitation of the Quran is sufficient enough to prevent him from making lahnun jali, from making the clear manifest errors, then that is the sufficient amount of tajweed that he needs to know. If he doesn't know the further or the other rules, then he is not sinful, though it would be better for him to know them. That is another position. And then there is a third position, and this is, wallahu ta'ala a'lam, the most balanced, and it is the position of Imam al-Jazari himself in another one of his books, An-Nashr, his monumental work, 2-volume book concerning the Qira'at al-Ashar, concerning the 10 modes of recitation. He mentions in An-Nashr that the one or that which is related to being sinful concerning the affairs of lahnul jali, lahnul khafi, he mentions that the reciters are divided into 3 categories. The one who is able to recite correctly, and he does so, then this individual, of course, is praiseworthy, and he doesn't fall into that which is blameworthy. Secondly, the one who strives to recite the Quran correctly, but falls into error and errs in relation to that, even though he's trying, this one, upon that which is most correct, is not sinful. And so the first one categorically isn't sinful, he's rewarded. That is, the one who is able to recite correctly and he does so, he's rewarded. The second is the one who strives to recite correctly, but he makes some errors. Any errors that are unintentional, errors that do not distort the meaning of the Book of Allah Azza wa Jal. And even if one were to do so erroneously, making an error, then what is most correct is that he is not sinful. The third position, or the third category of individual, rather, is the one who is able to recite the Quran correctly, yet he doesn't do so due to negligence. He's able to recite with tajweed, he's able to recite from the makharij, based upon the sifat, and other than that, but he couldn't be bothered. And so he recites the Quran, he just recites the Quran without any consideration to the rules of tajweed, without any consideration to that which Allah Azza wa Jalla has laid down from the command to recite the Quran with tartil. He just ignores that and just recites the Quran as he pleases, lazily, neglecting some of the rules of tajweed. He just recites the Quran, avoiding and neglecting those rules. This individual is sinful. This is the one that is sinful, and as we mentioned, that is the position of Imam al-Jazari in An-Nashr. And so, in relation then to the topic of tajweed and to that which is connected to the benefit that one receives from tajweed, then there is no doubt that the topic of tajweed is in relation to reciting the Book of Allah Azza wa Jal correctly. That is the topic of tajweed. Tajweed al-huruf wa ma'rifat al-wuquf, as we mentioned. And it is by way of this tajweed that there are numerous benefits that we receive and that are taken. From those benefits, the first of them and the most important of them is at-ta'abbud lillah wa imtithal li-amrihi, is that a person, by way of doing so, is carrying out an act of ibadah. Ikhwan, I was studying these rules of tajweed, I was studying these ahkam, I was studying that which is related to the makharij and practicing. All of this is ibadah. And what an easy act of ibadah to carry out, ikhwan. an act of ibadah that carries huge and immense reward. As the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, whoever recites the Quran, then he receives a reward for his recitation, and الحسنة بأشر أمثالها كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. The reward is multiplied tenfold. And then the Prophet ﷺ went on to say, وَلَا أَقُولُ أَلِفْ لَام مِيم حرف. I do not say ألف لام ميم حرف. For every harf, for every letter, he receives 10 rewards. The Prophet ﷺ said, and I do not say alif lam mim is a harf. Rather, alif is a harf, and lam is a harf, and mim is a harf. So when you're practicing your qira'ah, and you say alif lam mim, straight away, ikhwan, 30 rewards. 30 rewards just for reciting 3 letters from the book of Allah Azza wa Jal. And so the more you practice, every time you practice and you repeat and you go over and you repeat and you go over, even if you're reciting the same letters or the same words, memorizing a surah, each and every time you do so, then you are enumerating this reward over and over again. Over and over again, ikhwan. وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى. If we were to just count the letters that are present within that, if one were to repeat that over and over again, 10 rewards per letter. An easy manner of achieving reward, and an easy act of ibadah. So this study of Tajweed, we're looking into these huruf, going over them, revising them, understanding التفشي والاستعلاء والحمس والجهر والشدة. Understanding all of this is ibadah. Similarly, from the benefits of this Tajweed and studying Tajweed is making manifest the izhar, and making manifest the i'jaz of the Quran, the miraculous nature of the Quran. And that is intensified, ikhwan, by reciting the Quran correctly, understanding that which is connected to the Quran, of course, the language of the Quran generally, but from that is the recitation or the correct recitation of the Quran, and that which is related, ikhwan, to the huruf and the letters that are used, and how those letters and the rules that are related to them, how they are to be recited, and the beauty that is present within that recitation. Similarly, we see the difference between the recitation of the Book of Allah and reading ordinary books. This science aids in that, and we see the beauty in that which is present within the Book of Allah Azza wa Jal, and that which is present with ordinary books. And how, from the recitation of the Quran with Tajweed, the implementation of this Tajweed, if you were to bring that over to a regular book and the speech of mankind, in Arabic, but with the speech of mankind, you will see, ikhwan, that the beauty is not, even if you try and implement some of the rules of Tajweed, the beauty is not present. The timed manner in which, the timely manner in which when one recites, and he knows that this rule is going to follow that one, and it must be recited like this, and the elongation must be done like that, and the tarqiq is here, and the tafkhim is there. When it is put together and you recite, that is when you recite the full verse, rather than breaking the word down based upon just trying to get an understanding of how it is to be recited, which is going to be done by the student who's learning. But when he actually begins to implement, and he understands, and he becomes comfortable with the rules, and he implements those rules as he recites, you see the difference, ikhwan, between the Book of Allah Azza wa Jal and the speech of regular people. Try and implement those rules with the speech of regular people. It is nowhere near as beautiful. It is nowhere near as eloquent. And so this is one of the manners in which we see the i'jaz and the miraculous nature of the Book of Allah, as the people of knowledge have mentioned, Suyuti and others. This is one of the angles of the miraculous nature of the Quran. Not only that which is present within the meaning of some verses or what some verses indicate, but even down to the manner in which the letters come together, the manner in which the words are constructed, and the recitation of those words and the sound that is present and the effect that that sound has upon the heart. This is one of the benefits, Ikhwan, of the knowledge of a Tajweed. And without doubt, it calls an individual to recite the Quran correctly. Yani, the more you learn these rules, the more you want to recite the Quran, the more you want to practice with reciting, and the more you want to enjoy the recitation of the Quran. Not that it is just some task that we go through because we want some reward. La, it is something bihi, that we enjoy it, we find it something exquisite, something that we benefit from, something that we love to do. We enjoy it. And that is one of the benefits that we get from studying this Tajweed. Likewise, we have the beautification of the Quran with the recitation or with the utilization and the implementation of Tajweed. Likewise, an increase in the khushu' that a person is to have, whether in salah or outside of salah, just by listening to the recitation of the Quran, the effect that it has upon us, upon our hearts as we listen. And so there is an issue that we'll round up upon, and that is the statement that Imam al-Jazariyah rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned in the Lions. He said, وَهُوَ إِعْطَاءُ الْحُرُوفِ حَقَّهَا مِنْ كُلِّ صِفَةٍ وَمُسْتَحَقَّهَا. He said that Tajweed is to give the huruf, it is to give the letters حَقَّهَا. It is to give the letters their right. And then he continues, wa min kulli sifatin wa mustahaqqaha. That is from every characteristic and mustahaqqaha. And so he makes two statements here. Number one, the haqq of the harf, that is the right of the harf, or that which is due to the harf, and that is a reference here to reciting the harf or the letter from its makhraj. So the haqqul harf is to recite the letter from its makhraj. And then he said, min kulli sifatin wa mustahaqqa. And likewise the implementation of every sifa, every attribute and characteristic, and mustahaqqaha. Every characteristic and mustahaqqaha, that is what is, or what he intends here is from this mustahaq al-harf, or what the harf deserves, is that which it deserves from the sifat, from the characteristics of the letter when one recites it. And so it is to give the letter its haqq, and that is that it is taken or it is recited from its place of origin, the place of the origin of the articulation of the letter, and to give it its sifa and its mustahaq. The mustahaq is a reference to the sifat of the huruf, that is the attributes of the letter, and that which is connected to the mukammalat or the mukammilat, yani those things that complete the affair of reciting with tajweed, yani from tafkhim and tarqiq and other than that. And not overburdening oneself when he recites, not going beyond bounds when one recites, but to recite with relative ease and without overburdening oneself with the recitation, and without a haphazard recitation of the Quran, but a timely, easy, beautiful recitation, beautified by way of these rules. So we're going to begin then in the next session with the first of the rules, and that is Bab al-Ra'at. Bab al-Ra'at, or that which is connected to the letter Ra. And prior to our entering into that, we have a look at and a study of at-Tafkhim and at-Tarqiq, which is connected to Bab al-Ra. And so we have the study of Ra, followed by and connected to at-Tafkhim, which is, as we mentioned previously, to recite the letter in this heavy manner, and at-Tarqiq, which is the light recitation of the letter. We'll look at that in the next session, bi'idhnillah. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala nabiyyina Muhammad. Wa akhir